What was the most intense experience of your life? I've had some pretty intense experiences, but one comes to mind pretty quickly. I was about 19 years old, and me and my dad were caught in a giant riptide. I'm a strong swimmer, and I was confident in my father. It was us and about 20 other people, while there were only about 5 lifeguards. Everyone was being pulled out to sea pretty rapidly. Some were calm and others were freaking out. I looked to my left and saw a boy, about 9 years old maybe, who was freaking out and couldn't keep his composure. I swam towards him and started calming him down, saying, "Don't worry bud, it won't last forever. Just save your energy and don't fight it. The lifeguards will be here. Lay on your back and try to float." While he's crying, I swam to him and put my hands under his back, and he started floating. I maneuvered us horizontally and then a lifeguard came and took him away. I got to shore about 30 seconds later, and he was crying while his mom was yelling at him, telling him things like, "Why didn't you listen to me? You can't swim that far away." I went up to the mom and I was going to give him a high five and tell him that he did a great job of keeping calm. As I started talking, the mother looked at me, scolded at me and looked me head to toe, grabbed his hand and walked away. 2-year-old daughter was limping with a fever on a Sunday, so I took her to an urgent care clinic. In the first hour of getting there she falls unconscious and her fever spikes to 103. They give her some pain meds. She wakes up and the urgent care clinic tells me she needs to be transported by ambulance to the children's hospital, but they won't transport her without an IV. At this point her heart rate had stayed over 180/190 an hour. They attempt to do an IV 3 times and each time that they are unsuccessful her heart rate skyrockets. My 2-year-old is beyond upset at this point. She has a fever, she's sick, and they'd been poking her. The staff goes in for a 4th attempt. This is what was the most intense moment of my life. My child is being held down and screaming for all she is worth. One nurse on her left side is trying for an IV. The other nurse on the right side is watching the heart monitor. The monitor reads 238 beats per minute. The nurse monitoring the heart rate tells the other nurse to stop or she'll die. Worst words to say in front of a parent. The other nurse replied, "If I don't get an IV and she'll die in transport." Even worse words. I was terrified my daughter was going to die. She ended up having an ear infection with nothing more wrong with her. Terrible experience and several $1,000 bill. Pediatric clinician here. Kids' heart rates can be way higher than us adults and still be fine. During periods of agitation I've seen kids be 190/220 for several hours many times. Their resting heart rates are a lot higher as well. If you saw an adult at 230 BPM they're almost definitely in some kind of abnormal heart rhythm. Hunger. Not like I skipped lunch hunger, but having no food while backpacking for 5 days. You become feverish and euphoric at the same time and stressfully obsessed about food. Your lizard brain takes full control. I ate a lot of bugs. Lost all of my body fat muscle. Would not recommend. Withdrawing from opioids after being put on massive doses while in hospital. It was much worse than being in the crash that shattered my spine, pelvis, and one leg, and collapsed my lungs, and it was worse than recovering from the subsequent surgeries. I gained respect for dope sick junkies who can function well enough to stay alive while homeless, because I could barely crawl to the toilet to puke and crap my guts out, sometimes simultaneously. ETA. Thanks for the gold, kind stranger. I hope that others are at least as kind to those who are currently addicted. Nice, France, on the promenade. The 14th of July 2016. Never before that day did I decide which direction to move based on where I thought bullets would be least likely to be. At a BBQ down by the river my 4-year-old nephew disappeared. There were about 10 adults around and none of us saw him go. We were in the middle of a large grass reserve. River on one side, a wetland bird sanctuary on the other, and we all panicked. After about 15 minutes of searching with no luck, we called the cops, hoping they could help us find him. It took them half an hour to get there, and by this time, we were all frantic, but none more so than my sister. She was wading through the water, screaming his name, over and over. His name is Will, and I tell you, Stranger Things gave me flashbacks. I have never been so heartbroken in my life. I was just beginning to realize that he had probably drowned and I'd never see him again when we look up and see my husband walking across the grass, my nephew holding his hand. There was a playground that every one of us had searched twice, but he somehow found his way there. To this day, we have no idea how he snuck away, or where he was for those 45 minutes. We all got very drunk that night. Had a very similar experience. Cottage on an island. Missing 4-year-old. Who loved dogs. Adults searching increasingly frantically. The kid's dad making another guy dive under the dock cause it was the only place that hadn't been searched and he didn't want to find his daughter there. She was found asleep under a chair pretending to be a dog. In March of this year, I still had quite the problem with oxy. One weekend when my 2 roommates were going to be gone I had gotten myself 10 milligrams oxys and was going to have a great day night of video games and relax. After sniffing 4 of them I evidently overdosed and passed out. I later found out that they were press fentanyl pills. I woke up 18 hours later covered in my own vomit and sweat and fesses. No one found me because the people I lived with were gone. I very easily could have died but because I was sitting in a computer chair I couldn't choke on my own vomit. It really got to me and gave me the motivation to stay clean. Congrats on going clean and working hard to stay that way and leave behind the fear of that happening again. Very tough but so worth it. Glad you are here today, friend. Getting my drink mixed up with the girls at a party, getting roofied because of it, and running from the cops all night in December in a wife beater. My emergency C-section. I felt so sick from the meds and could do nothing but lay there and accept my fate. I could feel the pressure of being cut open and dug into. Then I felt major things being wiggled around and plop. It felt like one of those dead whales on the beach exploding. My baby was out of me and wailing. Then he was plopped on my chest looking pee off. Crashed my bicycle at around 40 miles per hour on pavement with nothing but lycra on. Broken wrist, collarbone and road rash like nobody's business. This was back in 2003. Qualifies as a TIFU I guess. I had volunteered for the MIS 150 bike tour as a mobile mechanic in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. I was on the bike with a backpack full of tools and spare tubes providing mechanical support, sweeping or helping those who broke down or had a flat. It was an amazing fall day, 70s, so we are all in shorts and jerseys. Towards the end I was itching to ride just to ride, so I passed my tool pack to my buddy and went on to ride the last section as a regular rider. These hills were fast and I was ripping down them. Super slow up, but hey, I was out there. There was a really nice steep descent with a sharp left at the bottom. This is the scene. It was a nice hairpin corner, but to make things worse it was covered in gravel from a recent washout. Just out of sight from the entrance, there was a volunteer warning riders to slow down, so everyone got through safe. After the last riders passed the hazard area, the volunteer packed up shop and moments later I came ripping down the hill. I entered the corner and leaning pretty well. Looked ahead and there was the gravel. This is the oh crap situation, and I managed to slow down to about 40 miles per hour or so when the bike just vanished out from underneath me. I stuck my hands out and that's all I remember for a while. As soon as my hands hit the ground all my fingerprints were torn off. Wrist folded in no way a wrist is ever supposed to fold. Snap the collarbone in half and slide 50 or so feet on the gravel into the ditch. I remember waking up in the ditch face down, taking my mangled arm and pushing myself over. Once I went to lay my arm back down I heard the crunching of the collarbone ends and realized I should just lay there and not try to get up. Fortunately, as karma would have it, there was a couple more riders I had helped along the way who found me, and an ambulance ride later I was on my way to the air. I hit the ground so hard the lenses came out of my Oakleys, but the frame was still on my head. My speedometer popped off the bike, so I have no recording of my top speed that day. As I slid into the ditch my helmet erased off my head like an eraser, and by the time I stopped there was hair sticking out of the flat spot. They said if it weren't for my helmet I wouldn't have survived the slide into the ditch. T-plate with 6 screws permanently in my wrist and nerve damage which left my hand completely numb until a carpal tunnel release. Collarbone almost punctured my lung. I get stopped at airport security from time to time and just have to show the scar. They cringe and shuffle me through. This bike is the namesake bike in my username. A Trek with XT components that I love to ride. TLDR. Wear your bike helmet and be careful. We only get one shot at this life. I was dog sitting for my brother. He has 2 giant dogs. It was a Saturday morning. My daughter was coloring at the table while I made pancakes. Suddenly, everything felt off. I heard a thump behind me, and even though it had been a solid few months without a seizure, I knew without even turning around that the thump was my daughter falling to the floor. I'm actually a very panicky person, so the fact that I got the giant dogs in their kennels and unplugged the pancake griddle before I even turned around is impressive. It wasn't her first seizure. I carefully moved her off the hardwood floor and onto a rug. I started a timer. Apparently short seizures are totally fine, but once you hit 8 minutes, that's when you should worry. I always worry from the first second. But hey, I'm no medical expert. I called 911 at minute 4. Since I'd yelled for my husband at minute 2, we were in the car and driving 90 miles per hour to our small town clinic at minute 5. She started moaning in my arms at minute 6. Otherworldly, heart-stopping moans. It took every last bit of anything even remotely resembling strength I had to not curl up and die of worry, stress, etc. I've never, ever felt that helpless and scared in my entire life. And then we finally finished the 25-mile drive to town and she came out of it. I thought we were through the worst of it as a nurse rushed us to the ER. And then my 3-year-old daughter started trying to talk to me. Could not understand a freaking word. I nodded and smiled and acted like I knew what she was saying because I didn't want her to be scared. She started wiggling in my arms and I knew she wanted to walk around and not be held. I lowered her to the ground and she just collapsed. Those little legs had been through a 25-minute seizure, but the way she looked at me when it happened, I still have no idea how I managed to meet her gaze and then scoop her up and comfort her when I felt such terror and worry course through me. The stuff of nightmares. The good news is she's fine, and we're about to hit the 2-year anniversary of being seizure free. Once I woke up under my bed, after dreaming about being in a cage. Looking up at my bedboards, I thought they were prison bars and went into full freak out mode. I ended up pushing my wooden bed a couple of feet away from the wall to get out. I was 9 at the time and just very confused and scared. After about a minute of standing there I went back to bed. Still have no idea how I got under my bed, surrounded by boxes I had under my bed. Like either someone did it or I somehow surrounded myself in my sleep. Super strange. First 14 years of my life. Grew up with my alcoholic father and stepmom. Abused in different ways and was their slave. Me and my stepsis had to work in our big butt house till past midnight pretty much every day, even those when we had school. If not, beaten or and no food. It was daily life, so I didn't really know anything else. What I hated the most though was those meetings with the teacher once every season to see how I was doing. I did all homework etc alone without my dad knowing, since I would rather work in the house than let him help me with my school work. So he got to know about everything that we did that season. I was shaking during those. Also, the most scared I've been was when my classmates told the nurse that I live in heck and will most likely commit suicide soon. They took me in to explain everything that was going on. Then social workers got involved and a half year later I lived with grandparents. The night I called the police on my abusive parent, my heart was racing because at age 16 this will be my first time to ask help from authorities. She said that they won't believe me and that she will tell them that I do drugs, and true, and that she will tell my younger sister to chime in. I told her that she is wrong and that when they see me they will believe me. That waiting was probably the most intense moment of my life, because my mother started to break things around the house and screamed the whole time and I just kept praying that they will arrive faster. When they arrived, she rushed outside. I stayed inside of the house. I was so confident that they would come in and listen to my side. The captain and one of his men came inside to tell me what troublesome child I must be and that I was wasting their time. At this point my sister half screamed that I was on drugs as per my mother's plan. I asked them to test me so that they can see that I don't use anything funny. I can prove it, though my eyes were swollen and red from all the crying. Probably looked like I was on something. I tried to show them the areas that she hit me with a belt buckle, but they were not interested. I cannot explain in enough words the feeling of betrayal I felt towards our police system. When they left, my mother came to me and said, "I told you they would believe me." I will always remember her wicked smile when she said that. When I was a little girl, I climbed to the very top of a tree that was probably 30 feet tall. It was awesome and I could see some mountains from up there. Suddenly the tree branch I was sitting on broke underneath me. I fell and thankfully landed right on a sturdy tree branch 6 feet underneath me in a perfect sitting position. Even though I was like 5, I swear I saw my life flash before my eyes. Some background. In 2012 my family, mom, dad, sister and I, and my parents' friends, husband and wife, decided to go to the damn lake for a picnic. It was just the 6 of us and only 2 men. We had simply gone to a damn lake for a BBQ and to relax. Unfortunately it was winter and by the time we got there, it was pretty quiet with maybe 1 or 2 other families around. Anyway, the 2 guys get down to setting up a BBQ while the rest of us were playing a few games of cards. Not too long after that, maybe 30 minutes, we all noticed that we were the only ones in that area. We didn't think much of it though and continued. A little while later we see a guy wearing a security uniform wandering down to where we were. No one thinks anything of it and we carried on, eating and chatting. Before any one of us could blink, the security guard pulled out a huge knife and went directly for my dad's friend's leg. He caught him on his shin bone and all I saw was blood just oozing out. Out of nowhere, this other guy had come holding what looked like a toy gun, but was in fact real. Next thing we knew, they were going through all of our stuff, taking jewelry, belts, even pants and shoes from the men. They worked pretty quickly and it all was done in about 10 minutes. They ended up stealing the car that we had used and we had to start walking to find help. As we walked, we saw the real security guard who said that the 2 guys had tied him up and threatened to kill him if he did or said anything. Being winter, it was getting dark but we had no choice but to walk looking for help. Thankfully, a taxi stopped and was able to take us back home. We had to break the locks to our house as the thieves had stolen the keys. We ended up using zip ties to secure the house for that night and all of us ended sleeping in one room. It was the most scary experience of my life. TLDR. Went to the damn lake for a picnic. Ended up being hijacked and robbed by pretend security. Had to walk to look for help. Got home safely. All slept in one room that night. I was waiting for some scary story like this to appear. Shudders. Honestly, having a 300-pound filing cabinet fall and pin me against the wall across my collarbone. I couldn't lift it off me and could feel it slowly crushing my airspace for 10 minutes until a co-worker found me. Said filing cabinet was in a concrete vault in the basement with 0 sound travel. It happened the day after I went skydiving and my thoughts were I'm going to die here, crushed by a filing cabinet. This one out of all of them is honestly the scariest one for me. When your best friend calls you crying about his pregnant wife being rushed to the hospital, you don't question things, you just go. Spent something like 10-12 days there till an immediate C-section was needed, and the little one passed 6 hours later. I had to break the news to her as he was still with the little one. Seeing just a small glimpse of what nurses deal with day in and day out, I will quickly put anyone in place who badmouths nurses. Found a dead baby in a patient's bed after induction of labor for intrauterine fetal demise. I did not know it was possible to feel faint while seated. A close second was when a stranger attempted to sexually assault me. That was why stressful and had long-lasting effects. Backcountry camping pretty deep into Glacier National Park in Montana when me and my 2 buddies were woken up by heavy breathing and heavier footsteps as a bear approached our camp pad. You could hear it ripping limbs and bark apart and scratching away at trees just a few feet away. Nobody moved a muscle. Felt like no one took a breath as the bear kept coming up and inspecting our tent. Minutes felt like hours before it finally decided to wander on. It was probably the longest half hour of my life. Having to juggle the idea of being ready to react if the bear decided to try and enter our tent and simultaneously staying quiet and motionless as it may not realize anyone's inside. Whoa, that does sound very intense. Driving down the interstate with my mom, seeing dark clouds rolling by, thinking nothing of it, then lightning ahead of us but looking like it wasn't really in the sky, followed by intense fog where no one could see, and insane wind. We and everyone else slowed our cars to a stop. I roll my window down a little and I hear the most intense vacuum cleaner type of sound ever that struck fear in me. In front of us was a tornado that had literally just spawned around a 1 to 1 mile ahead. We were luckily next to an exit and we pulled into a truck weigh-in station. Upon getting out, the wind was really intense, hard to even move. We stayed inside until it went away. I never want to experience that again. From how close it was and just the noise of it, it was really frightening. Friend broke his leg badly while we were mountain biking. I had no signal, so I had to get to somewhere where I could get signal to call an ambulance and get help. I came back to him 15 minutes later and helped carry him out of the forest to a road so the ambulance could bike him up. Then I had to bring both the bikes to his car and load them up and illegally drive to the hospital after calling his parents and mine. The driving was illegal since I didn't have the stage of my license where I was allowed to drive alone yet. It was intense because he was the good biker of us, so I was really scared to see him injured. The break was fine and has since healed and he's back to biking. Going skydiving for the first time, jumping from 13,000 feet and my main chute wouldn't pull and hearing my skydiving instructor go oh crap, while struggling to pull the reserve chute as well. Finally got the reserve chute pulled, though we were way lower than we should have been when it did get pulled, so the landing wasn't too fun either. Welp, that's never getting checked off my bucket list. I was underway on a US fast attack submarine and we had a fire in the middle of the night. Woke up to the alarm around 100 and it was amazing how fast the whole crew was up and taking action. We were able to put out the fire pretty quickly, but it was definitely intense and really showed that all of our damage control training was not wasted. Birth, definitely, but also, learning my daughter had leukemia and that whole process. She's better now and almost 5 years off treatment, but I still deal with it occasionally. I had a miscarriage followed by a few years of terrible depression and anxiety so severe I could barely function. My partner put up with it for a year and left a week before Christmas, and my cat died a few weeks later. It was not a pleasant way to spend my mid-20s. Have been there, except for the cat. I think that would have been the end for me. I was 21. Just found out that I can't have kids because my uterus is in butthole. Going for my consult today to have it cut out at 27. Party on Wayne. Seriously, I'm very sorry for your losses. Mine is different from the near-death top comments, but here goes. When I was a teenager in art history class, I think this was 9th grade, we were studying Roman sculpture. One of the teacher's slides showcased the Rape of Persephone, a marble statue by Gian Lorenzo Bernini. I remember becoming completely transfixed with it, and immediately falling in love. Since that moment I had always had a dream of seeing that statue in person. I grew up super poor in the hood in Queens, NY, so while this dream was sort of always in the back of my mind, I felt it would stay a dream until I died. Anyway, a decade passes and this last May my friend and I decided to go to Rome as we had found incredibly cheap tickets. As it turns out, the statue is housed in the Galleria Borghese in Rome, so I made it a point to go see it. I remember walking into the building and almost having an anxiety attack. I was afraid that after all this time, maybe this statue wouldn't live up to my expectations. But for about 12 years I was in love with this thing. Sometimes I would just look it up online and stare at how beautiful it was. I didn't realize it was the main piece in the first gallery, and as soon as I stepped into the space I saw it and I was completely overwhelmed. I immediately started crying. I was so flush with feelings, the tears wouldn't stop coming out. I stared at that piece for about 20, maybe 25 minutes, and I think I cried the entire time. I was starting to get self-conscious because the gallery had a healthy amount of people in it, but I couldn't help it. It is, to me, a completely perfect piece, and unlike so many things in life, it far exceeded my expectations. It was such a potent moment in my life. Not only was I in front of this incredible masterpiece, my favorite piece of art in the world, but in that moment I had accomplished a goal that I had set in my mind 12 years before, and I did it before I kicked the bucket. It meant so much to me that this poor kid from Queens made it to Italy on his own and accomplished something he wanted to do. It really proved to myself that I am able to achieve anything I want in this life, and that the rewards that exist out in the world really make it worth it. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.